The smell of cornbread dressing still clung to my kitchen walls when my son called to tell me I wouldn't be welcome at Thanksgiving. I remember standing at the counter, still wearing the apron his mother had embroidered for me the Christmas before she passed the one with the little turkey on the front that she thought was hilarious. I had just pulled the cast iron skillet off the burner and was thinking about whether to use sage or thyme when my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, picked up, and heard his voice. Not upset, not uncomfortable, just matter of fact, the way you'd tell someone the dry cleaning was ready. "Dad, I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving this year." I said sure, figuring maybe he wanted to change the time, or maybe my daughter-in-law's parents had a longer drive than expected and he needed to adjust the seating. "We're going to do things a little differently this year. Karen's parents are coming in from Connecticut and the house is going to feel pretty packed. We thought it might be better if you sat this one out." I set the spoon down on the counter. Slowly. "Sat this one out," I repeated. "It's just this year, Dad. It's not a big deal." I stood there for a moment, looking at the apron. I thought about his mother. I thought about the 34 Thanksgivings I had shown up to as a young father, cutting turkey with a carving knife I still couldn't quite manage, as a middle-aged man who learned to make her cornbread dressing from scratch because it made her happy, and then as a widower who drove 40 minutes to my son's house every year because it was the only place that still felt like family. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about the envelope I'd sealed 2 weeks ago, the one with the check inside for his mortgage payment, the way I did every month for the past 2 years. "I understand," I said, and I hung up. I didn't cry. I put the skillet back on the stove, turned off the burner, took off the apron, folded it neatly over the back of the chair, and sat down at the kitchen table in a house that had been quiet for 3 years. I sat there until it got dark outside. Then I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. I looked at the recurring transfer I had set up. $1,200. Every first of the month, sent to my son's account. I had started it when he and my daughter-in-law bought the house in Scottsdale. A house that was, truthfully, beyond what their combined income could comfortably support. I had offered to help because that is what fathers do, or at least what I believed fathers did. I had paid the down payment gap when the appraisal came in low. I had covered the HOA fees the first year while they got settled. And then the $1,200 became the quiet agreement we never discussed out loud. The way a lot of things in our family had become quiet agreements we never discussed out loud. I did not cancel the transfer that night. I closed the laptop and went to bed. I want to be honest about what the next few weeks felt like, because I think that matters. People assume the anger comes first. It didn't. What came first was a kind of hollow embarrassment, not for myself exactly, but the kind you feel when you realize you have been misreading a room for a very long time. I had believed I was a participant in my son's life. I had believed the monthly check was an expression of love, given freely, received with some version of gratitude. What I understood, sitting at that dark kitchen table, was that I had been categorized. I was the check. I was the airport pickup when needed. I was the person whose number you called when the water heater went out on a Sunday. I was useful. And when my daughter-in-law's parents flew in from Greenwich, people who, I would later learn, had never once offered to contribute to the mortgage on a house their daughter lived in, I was the thing that needed to be tidied away. My daughter-in-law had made her feelings about me clear in smaller ways over the years, the way a person can communicate something enormous through a series of gestures that are each individually dismissible. She had a way of going quiet when I spoke at dinner. Not rudely, just absent. She would pull my son into another room for whispered conversations whenever I visited for more than 2 hours. She had never, in 6 years of marriage to my son, asked me a single question about my life before she entered it. Not about my career, not about my wife, not about where I grew up. I was a character who had existed before her story began, and therefore didn't fully count. I had told myself I was being ungenerous. I had told myself she was simply private, or that she found me intimidating, or that she was still adjusting to being part of a family that had known loss. I had spent 6 years making excuses that were courteous to her, and quietly unkind to my own instincts. Thanksgiving came and went. I drove to a diner 40 minutes from my house. the kind of place open on holidays for people who need somewhere to be. And I had turkey and mashed potatoes at the counter and talked to the waitress about her daughter's soccer tournament. It was fine. I was fine. I kept telling myself I was fine the way you press on a bruise to see if it still hurts. It still hurt. What I did not do was call my son to discuss it. What I did not do was send an emotional message or leave a voicemail that I would later regret. What I did instead, on the morning of December 1st, was log into my bank account and pause the recurring transfer. $1,200 stayed in my account. I want to be careful here about how I describe what happened next, because I am aware that what I did could look like punishment, and I have thought about that. It wasn't punishment. Exactly. It was more like a correction. I had been operating under a set of assumptions about my role in my son's life, and those assumptions had turned out to be wrong. It seemed reasonable to adjust my behavior to match reality. If I was not family when it was inconvenient, then perhaps the financial arrangement we had was also something that needed to be reconsidered. I said nothing to my son. I simply stopped. For the first 2 weeks of December, nothing happened. I thought about calling him, not about the money, just to talk, and each time I picked up the phone, I put it back down. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure what I would say that wouldn't come out sideways. I went to church. I had lunch with a friend from work who had retired the same year I did. I refinished a bookshelf I had been putting off for months. I lived my life. On December 19th, my son called. I let it ring. He called again an hour later. I let that ring too. That evening he sent a text. "Dad, can we talk?" I looked at it for a long time and then set my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. The next morning he called 4 more times before noon. At 12:30, a number I didn't recognize called twice. At 2 in the afternoon, my son sent another text. "Dad, this is urgent. Please call me back." I made a cup of coffee and sat in the chair by the window and thought about the word urgent. For 2 years, urgent had been. The roof estimate came in higher than expected. Urgent had been. We want to redo the kitchen, and the contractor has a cancellation in 3 weeks. Urgent had been. Karen's car needs new brakes, and we're a little short this month. Urgent had meant I was needed for something specific, and once that specific thing was handled, the urgency would pass, and my son would go back to the comfortable distance that had become our normal. I called him back at 3 o'clock. He answered before the second ring. "Dad, thank God. I've been trying to reach you." "I know," I said. "I saw the calls. I've been busy." There was a pause. Then, "The mortgage payment didn't come through." I said, "I know." Another pause. Longer this time. "Did something happen? With your bank? Is everything okay on your end?" I noticed the way he asked it, gently probing, looking for the most comfortable explanation, the one where this was an error and not a decision. I understood the impulse. It was easier. "Everything is fine on my end," I said. Silence. "Dad, I've been thinking," I said, "about our arrangement. I've been thinking that I'd like to revisit it." Revisit it. He repeated it the way I had repeated, sat this one out. Back in October, standing at the stove. I wondered if he noticed. "I'm 64 years old," I said. "I'm retired. Your mother is gone. I have been sending you $1,200 a month for 2 years. In addition to the down payment gap and the HOA fees and the various other things we've helped each other with over time, I have done that, gladly. I want you to know that. I have done it because I love you, and because I wanted to be useful to you." "Dad, you are." "I'm not finished," I said gently. He went quiet. What I learned in October is that being useful and being welcome are 2 different things. And I have been sitting with that for a while now. I think, going forward, I'd like to be a little more intentional about how I spend what I have left in every sense of that word. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I looked at the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "The mortgage is due in 12 days, he finally said. "I know when it's due," I said. "I've been paying it for 2 years. Karen's parents are still here. It's not a good time." "That's all right," I said. "We don't have to solve everything tonight. I just wanted to be honest with you about where I stand. I think that's fair." I told him I loved him. I told him I hoped he had a good holiday. And then I said goodbye and hung up. and sat in the quiet of my house for a long time and felt, underneath the grief of it, something that was almost like peace. What I hadn't anticipated was my daughter-in-law. She called me the following morning from her own cell phone, the first time in 6 years she had ever called me directly. I stared at her name on the screen with something close to astonishment. "Robert," she said when I answered, and her voice was the voice she used at dinner parties, the smooth, careful one. "I think there's been some confusion." "Has there?" I said. "My husband is very stressed right now, and I don't think this is the right time to be making financial changes. The mortgage is not something we've budgeted to cover independently at this point." I let a moment go by. "That's a difficult position to be in," I said. "I'm glad you understand." "I wasn't finished," I said, again gently. "That's a difficult position to be in. I imagine it's the kind of situation where you'd want to look at all your options. Your parents are in town, aren't they? That might be a good conversation to have." There was a very particular kind of silence that followed. I had heard silences like it before in business negotiations, in the waiting room before a hard conversation. The silence of someone recalibrating. "My parents aren't in a position to. I'm not in a position to continue our current arrangement," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm sorry if this is coming at a difficult time. I want you both to be okay. I genuinely do, but I've realized I need to be honest about my own needs too." She said something else that I don't remember exactly, something about how unfair this was, something about how I was doing this deliberately, something about how she had always known I didn't respect her. I listened until she finished. Then I said I hoped she and my son could work through it, and I said goodbye, and I hung up. That afternoon I drove to the hardware store and bought the wood stain I needed for the second bookshelf. My son came to my house 4 days before Christmas. He called ahead, which I appreciated. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table I'd sat at in the dark in October, and he looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep. "I need to understand what happened," he said. "Which part?" I asked. He rubbed his face with both hands. "All of it, I guess. The Thanksgiving thing, and then I need to understand what you're doing, and why." I told him, as clearly and calmly as I could. I told him about standing at the stove in his mother's apron. I told him about driving to the diner. I told him about sitting with the quiet in this house for 3 years and still driving 40 minutes every holiday because family meant something to me, and I had believed it meant something to him too. He didn't say anything for a long time. He stared at his coffee cup. "Karen's parents never offered," he said finally, quietly. "I want you to know that. I didn't ask them because I knew they'd make it complicated. There would have been conditions. There should have been conditions from me too," I said. "That's partly on me. I gave freely, and I didn't ask for much. But I think what I needed, what I was hoping for without saying, was just to be included. Not as the bank, as your father." He looked up at me then, and he looked very much like the 8-year-old who had cried at his Little League game and then been furious at himself for crying because he hadn't yet learned that those two things could coexist. "I should have told her no," he said. "When she said it would be easier if you didn't come, I should have said that wasn't something I was willing to do. I didn't say anything. I let that sit between us. I know that doesn't fix it," he said. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't fix it, but it helps to hear." We talked for almost 2 hours. We talked about his mother, which we hadn't done in a long time. We talked about the house and what it cost, and whether they had gotten in over their heads. We talked about his marriage carefully, because that is not my place to dissect, but he said enough for me to understand that the entitled ease I had observed in my daughter-in-law was something he had begun to notice too, without quite having the vocabulary for it yet. I did not offer to resume the monthly payment that day. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't cruelty. It was that I wasn't ready, and I thought the pause was doing something important, not punishing him, but creating a space where we could have a conversation we had been avoiding for years because the money had made the avoidance too comfortable. What happened next I did not plan for, and I want to be precise about this. I did not engineer it. I did not orchestrate it. And when it happened, I felt more embarrassed on their behalf than vindicated. My daughter-in-law, it turned out, had spent the weeks after our phone call talking to people. people in the neighborhood, people in their social circle. She had framed the situation in the way that made the most sense from inside her own perspective. Her difficult father-in-law, his erratic behavior, the pressure he was putting on their family. She had done what people sometimes do when they feel cornered. She had tried to build a coalition. What she hadn't accounted for was that two of the couples in their neighborhood were also people I knew. One of them, a man I had worked with for 12 years before we both retired, had called me on a Tuesday afternoon in early January, not to report on what was being said, but just to check in, the way old friends do. During the conversation, it came out naturally, the way things do. He was cautious about it. He said he just wanted me to know there was another side to the story making the rounds in case I heard it elsewhere. I thanked him. I sat with it for a day. Then I put together a simple document. Not dramatic, not a manifesto, just a clear, factual account of the financial support I had provided over 2 years, with dates and amounts, because I had kept records, as I had always kept records, and I sent it, quietly and without comment, to my son. I did not send it to anyone else. I did not call anyone. I did not post anything or tell anyone what to think. I simply made sure my son had the facts, because he deserved to have them, and because I suspected there were things happening in his own house that he hadn't been fully told. He called me 4 hours later. I could tell from the first syllable that something had shifted. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. Not sorry about Thanksgiving. Not sorry about the money. Just sorry. The way you say it when the word has to carry everything else because there isn't a more precise word for what you mean." "I know," I said. I didn't. I wasn't aware of everything she had said. To people. I should have been paying more attention. "You don't have to explain her to me," I said. "I know. But I want you to know that I don't want to be the person I was in October. That's not who I want to be." I believed him. I still do. We saw each other for Christmas, just the two of us, at my house, with carry-out from a barbecue place he had found that had a Christmas menu. We sat at the kitchen table and he said the food was better than anything he'd eaten in months, and I thought he might be right, and we talked until almost 11 at night. It was the best holiday I'd had in 3 years. I won't tell you that everything resolved cleanly after that. Real things don't resolve cleanly. My daughter-in-law and I remain in a kind of careful truce, polite when we see each other, not close, not pretending to be what we aren't. My son and I are finding our way back to something that feels more honest than what came before. And honesty, even when it's harder, tends to last longer. I did eventually resume a modified version of the financial support, not $1,200 a month, but a smaller amount, with a clear conversation about what it was and wasn't. Not a blank check against future indignities. Not a substitute for being included. A gift, freely given, with both of us understanding exactly what it was. I'm 64 years old. I was married for 31 years to a woman who made the best cornbread dressing in 3 counties and who would have known exactly what to do with all of this. She always did. I have one son whom I love, even when love is complicated. I have a house that is quiet, and a second bookshelf that turned out better than the first, and a diner 40 minutes away that is open on holidays for people who need somewhere to be. And I have learned or relearned, really, because I think I knew at once that dignity is not something other people can give you or take from you. It's something you carry yourself. It's something you maintain quietly, in the dark kitchen, at the counter, with your hands on the phone, deciding what to do next. I chose myself. Not out of anger, not out of spite, out of the simple, hard-won understanding that a person who is only valued for what he provides has not actually been valued at all. That love without presence is a transaction. That family is something you choose, and something you build, and something you are allowed at 64, with all the years still behind you that are behind you to want to be treated as. If you are in a situation like mine, and I suspect some of you are, because I didn't think I could be the only one. And the fact that you're still watching tells me something. I am not here to tell you what to do. Every family is different. Every relationship has its own specific texture of hurt and history. What I can tell you is that the silence I had been keeping for 6 years, the silence of accommodating and adjusting and not wanting to make things difficult, had its own cost. It cost me my honest relationship with my son. It cost me 3 years of holiday dinners where I was present in body, but already half erased. It cost me the chance to say, clearly and without drama, what I needed, which was nothing outrageous, nothing unreasonable, just, I am your father. I would like to be in the room. The cornbread dressing, for what it's worth, turned out fine that Christmas at the diner. Not as good as hers. Nothing ever will be. But I ate it at the counter, and I talked to the waitress, and I drove home in the dark, and I did not feel sorry for myself. Not really, not in the way that eats at you. I felt something quieter and more useful than that. I felt like I knew exactly who I was. And I knew, driving home that night on the empty highway with the heater running and the radio off, that I was not finished. That 64 is not the end of anything. That there were more Christmases coming, and more choices to make about how to spend them and with whom and on what terms. That I could still, if I was careful and honest and not afraid of the quiet, build something worth having. I pulled into the driveway. I sat for a moment with the engine running. I thought about my wife. I thought about my son sitting across from me at that kitchen table and saying, "I'm sorry," in the voice that meant something. I turned off the car. I walked inside. I took the apron off the hook by the refrigerator, the one with the little turkey on the front, and I held it for a moment, and then I folded it carefully and put it back. I turned on the light.